Right, time to talk to Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, who's here with me now. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. So we're expecting a deal, though the government moments ago couldn't confirm that it's going to come or not. What do you make of this last minute
this is just posturing. There's a deal basically being done to surrender some of the opportunities from Brexit, and it's quite clear that a scheme dressed up as youth mobility will actually be a return to freedom of movement in all but name, and that's not what the British people want, and they confirmed that when they voted out, significantly for reform just a few weeks ago. It'll be a surrender of our ability to make our own rules. Instead, we're going to go back to basically being a rule taker from the EU, what they call dynamic alignment. We could have mutual recognition of both sides' already existing strong standards. So that's that. And then the big surrender, of course, will be on fishing, which is of deep concern to my fishing constituents in Boston and Skegness, who are furious at this complete betrayal.
I want to go through some of those individual line items in a moment, but just stepping back, and obviously you have different priorities to the government, but attempting a renegotiation of a deal that you've criticised in the past, that must be something that you ultimately support?
Yeah, look, I mean, you can always improve relations and you want greater trade, but what you can't do is give up the benefits of Brexit. And the key thing there on trade specifically is this issue of rules and regulations. The EU main economy, Germany, is in recession. And our economy is struggling. The last thing we want to do is hijack and handcuff ourselves to an EU that is in recession. We need to break free of that. We need to be trading more elsewhere in the world and reduce costs by reducing unnecessary daft EU regulations.
So does that mean that it's a given, based on what's happened in the last couple of years, that trading with the EU will require pages and pages of forms to be completed, as is the case at the moment, in a way that didn't used to be the case before? Is that a price we're just going to have to pay?
No, because what they should be doing is saying, actually, we've got mutual recognition of existing high standards. That's what you have in most trade deals around the world. But because the EU is so dogmatic, it's such a bully, and it can't stand the fact that the UK has broken free and has opportunities to do trade deals elsewhere in high-growth areas. And I repeat, the EU is a low-growth, recessionary area that we need to distance ourselves from as opposed to handcuff ourselves to.
But I totally get that. I mean, if we were all, rational and friendly, then yes, unnecessary pages of paperwork.
But you can be friendly with the nations, but you don't have to be friendly with the bungling bureaucrats in Brussels that set the rules.
But my point is, and you framed it as saying that they're dogmatic. I'm not saying that myself. But either way, we are where we are, and they have imposed a lot of paperwork for lorries crossing the border.
Out of spite.
But then how would you remove it?
You don't need it because you've got mutual recognition.
Yeah, but they choose that. How are you going to convince them to remove the unnecessary, you say, spiteful...
Very simple, folks. Germany's in recession. Most of the big EU economies are in recession. We're doing a little bit better, but we're struggling. Maybe you need less rules and regulations, a bit more trusted traded standards, mutual recognition. Maybe what they're doing at the moment isn't working for the citizens of the EU. Maybe they should learn from how other fast-growing nations are doing it and smarten up. That's the issue. You've got
high energy
costs from net stupid zero. You've got the suppressing of wages through mass immigration across the whole of the EU, which we've also experienced here. So maybe they could actually learn some lessons to do things better rather than dogmatically, stubbornly stick to their traditional old ways that are failing EU citizens.
And that would be great, but it's not happening. And what is...
That doesn't mean we have to surrender back towards them. We should be breaking free of this nonsense.
So the reality is then that trade with the EU will either be under the same terms as we have currently or worse under a reform-led government if that materialises. My point is they might be dogmatic, they might be spiteful, but this is their position.
Let's focus on what works for Britain. And what does not work for Britain is to handcuff ourselves as a rule taker to a failing economic model. What works for Britain is actually, let's do more trade with fast-growing nations around the world. Let's get rid of daft regulations, get rid of net zero so we can reduce the cost of energy, make ourselves more competitive. That's how you put more pocket in people's more money in people's bank accounts at the end of the week, at the end of the month. And at the moment, people are getting poorer month by month.
So that's fine, but I guess my point is no better trade terms with the EU. You're acknowledging that.
Well, we can always talk about it. I'm saying that we should be using mutual recognition. I'm saying they should be getting rid of regulations, not imposing ever more regulations. And I'm saying we shouldn't be surrendering our fishing waters that actually British fishermen want back. We want proper control of our own fishing waters.
And let's touch on the fishing and then maybe we'll get to youth mobility. But on the fishing point, totally get the principle, our waters. I totally get the level of importance to all those involved in the industry, particularly in your constituency. Does the fact that it's quite a small part of GDP have to be considered as well when doing negotiations overall,
but it's
or not?
a massive part of the coastal communities up and down the country, including in Boston Skegness. And those are the communities that suffer the most deprivation, had the least regeneration over the last 15 to 20 years. So actually, it's a very significant opportunity, but we've got to grasp that opportunity as opposed to just surrender it because you think it's de minimis. And that's not actually the right way to do it. Of course, there's always a balance, there's always a bit of give and take. We accept that. But if you're just going to always surrender everything, then that is not a sensible way to proceed. And that's our concern, is that on fishing, on regulations and on freedom of movement, this government is surrendering the benefits of Brexit.
We shall see what emerges in the deal. I guess it's hard to be certain at this point. On youth mobility specifically, are you against that outright in principle, or because you think it's a slippery slope to moving back to freedom?
It's the thin end of a wedge, and it's a badge name. We're told it's going to be 18 to 35. There's a big difference between 18 to 20-year-olds wanting to go and sort of travel for a couple of months and maybe work in hospitality or something, and actually 18 to 35 working for many years. That's freedom of movement by the back door. That actually is what the British people don't want. We've had mass immigration, uncontrolled, and we've seen the effects of that. It suppresses British wages. It reduces the incentive for British firms to train up young British people. That's what we've got to be focusing on. And I think that they're clearly not learning the lesson from a couple of weeks ago when we did so well in the polls. We essentially won by a landslide. And clearly what the Prime Minister announced last week on trying to control immigration was just words and waffle with no intent whatsoever. This will significantly increase net immigration into the United Kingdom, directly in contrast to what the British people want.
Although it's up in the air exactly how clear that is on youth mobility, it polls quite differently overall to the issue. Couple more quick questions. This debate came up last week because of a bit of reporting Sam Coates did on something Chris Philp had said. Put aside legal immigration for now. In terms of illegal immigration, and specifically the small boats, is it fair to say that an unintended consequence of Brexit has been, specifically as it means to small boats, that is harder to control than it was previously?
No, not at all. Absolutely nothing to do with it. Those on the other side, the do-gooders, the lefty lawyers, will say, oh, it's all to do with the Dublin Agreement. Absolute twaddle. The reality is that we were returning hardly anybody before Brexit under that Dublin Agreement. You've got to control your borders, and at the end of the day, we're an island. And it's pathetic that we can't actually safely pick up and take back to France, which we're legally entitled to do.
But why did the numbers spike so much since Brexit then?
It's got nothing to do with Brexit whatsoever. The Brexit vote was in 2016.
Yeah.
The numbers started spiking because people suddenly realised, the economic opportunists realised that Britain was the most generous nation.
Since the Brexit deal was done?
It's got nothing to do with Brexit. It's because they realised our generosity with 4-star hotels, free everything, basically, including free driving lessons. We've taken control of councils, we're now discovering tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds of our cash being paid on free driving lessons. So, of course, the numbers have gone up. What else would you expect?
Do you think the French could do more to stop the small boats departing?
Of course they could. They could do what the Belgians did, which is to pick up and take back to Belgian shores. The French have a legal obligation under the 1982 UN Convention of Law at Sea that I have read, and they're in breach of that obligation.
But I guess this is something that pre-Brexit, forget the vote, the deal, they did do, and now they're not doing.
No, they weren't doing it before. That essentially, that trade, that economic opportunism hadn't started in the early 2010s and things. People were coming across in lorries. Then, because of scanners, that stopped. They found different ways.
Final quick question: is Rupert Lowe? Is there a route back to him to the party or not?
I think that's extremely unlikely.
Should he start, if he's considering starting a new party altogether, is that something that worries you?
No, not at all. Good luck to him.
Richard Tice, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.